Hi, everyone. Welcome to Season 2 of Math for Antiracism with Teachers to Teachers Global. I'm Callie Herring, Director of Global Partnerships, and I'm super excited to be here with you tonight and to introduce you to one of my dear friends who is in this work for quality education that builds more just societies. So I'm excited to introduce him in just a moment, but as you're coming in, I want to share a little bit about what we are up to with Math for Antiracism. So, this is an opportunity for our team to really dive deep and invite all teachers in the United States who are interested in diving deep into this alongside of us, into really unpacking what is quality education and what role does anti-racism play in ensuring that we're offering quality education to all of our students that drives opportunities for them. And so the last episode, 2 weeks ago, we heard from Dr. Kendall Brown on the intersection of math, anti-racism, and social justice. And before that, we got to hear about the generational impact of quality math education. So if you haven't seen those, we hope that you'll check them out after this show. And now it is my honor and pleasure to introduce all of you out there to my dear friend, Donnell Cannon. So Donnell is a native of Richmond, Virginia, and he works on issues of educational equity and youth development with a focus on designing and building innovative learning environments that work for all children. After earning a bachelor's degree from Norfolk State University, Donnell joined Teach for America as a core member in Eastern North Carolina and taught middle school social studies in Weldon, North Carolina. Side note, that's where we met. We were both teachers with TFA in Weldon for a couple years down there. And so Donnell served as the director of CDF Freedom Schools in Rocky Mount, North Carolina from 2013 to 2015. And he holds a Master of School Administration degree as part of North Carolina State University's Northeast Leadership Academy, also known as NELA. So currently, Donnell is the principal of North Edgecombe High School and the co-founder of the North Phillips School of Innovation. The North Phillips School of Innovation, a micro school, was created to provide students a liberating education that allows them to develop and pursue their passions, realize their life's purpose, remain resilient in the face of challenges, and lead social and economic change in their families and communities, creating a ripple for generations to come. Donnell is the proud uncle of one niece and two nephews who constantly fuel his inspiration and urgency in this work. So Donnell, welcome.
Thank you for having me. And it's great to join in the virtual space. We've had threads of our work, we've been connected, but this feels good to join again.
So true. And here I am in another continent. Our paths have intersected in so many ways in North Carolina, and it's great to be working with such similar missions, even as I'm here in Ecuador.
Yeah.
So let's jump into it. In defining quality education, let's start with how quality education is typically defined and maybe what some of the problems with that might be.
Yeah. So I think the way that quality education is typically defined, I think it's a very narrow focus where learners engage in experiences that focus primarily on the cognitive dimensions of learning, and it's absent and does not observe or acknowledge that learners have to engage in experiences that nurture the totality of their cognitive, emotional, social, physical, and the factors that impact their learning and their development, and their overall health and their well-being. In many schools we see where kids are engaging in these rote activities. So our kids are engaging in memorizing and recalling a broad array of content, and are often assessed on the ability to recall and explain that information. And where students aren't actually charged with critical thinking and making encoding and making meaning of their already rich experiences that they bring to our classroom. They're making meaning of their diverse, complex ideas, and are assessed on their ability to actually apply and analyze and then use that data in creative ways across multiple contexts to solve the really big problems that are already in front of them. And there's a certain level of irrelevance that happens within our traditional public schools. So our students have experiences that often feel disconnected from their interests, their goals, the things that set their hearts on fire, their professional ambitions, their personal challenges, and the other complexities that show up in their lives. They aren't given an opportunity to run right into their interests and their own goals, connected to their community needs, that help them to really tackle like problems that are in front of them. And then there's a level of assimilation that happens in our schools too, because of this idea of like whiteness as property, this idea of like color blindness. Our kids are often stripped of their own identities and stripped of their wildest ambitions. So that our students are often pushed into the margins in our school, where they aren't willing to show up in like the fullness of who they are. And if they're not conforming to dominant culture, it comes with a cost, right? And there's a risk of like alienation. And instead, like our schools, we have to focus on providing students a sense of self and a sense of purpose, and a deep like understanding of like their own identities and appreciation and affirmation regarding that, but also like learning how to like value, respect, and honor the different identities that their others bring to spaces. So I think those are just like multiple ways that we're seeing learning in traditional public schools, but also ways in which like we like things that we want to see like widely represented.
Yeah, and I'm curious as to I've read a lot about interesting like the innovation happening in Edgecombe, but what exactly was it that spurred that? What did it take for your district to say like we've got to do something differently?
Yeah. So Cal, so you've known me for a while. So like we were obviously teachers together in Weldon. So the reason I joined some of the work over in Edgecombe, because they already had like a deep appetite for reimagining what school could be. So that was like a great place to start. After our first year, we had like honored the demands of like the traditional public school system, right? We're like creating like corrective action plans. Our teachers were doing data analysis. Our students were doing like rote learning. We're learning facts. We're learning like standards, how to engage and demonstrate mastery. And after that first year in our school, like we like nailed the state standard, the state end of the year assessments. And so that felt good. And our kids needed like a deep celebration. We realized that like school just still wasn't working for kids, right? Because school violated the things that like I like kind of recognized earlier that like needed to be true, right? Like kids need to develop a critical consciousness, a social consciousness, learn how to act on things in their lives, learn more about their own lived experiences in their life context, learn more about their identities to be able to show up in the fullness of that. Run towards like the things that they're really interested in, how to take like real complex challenges in their lives and actually like use our standards and leverage of like solving those problems. Like it wasn't happening for our kids. And like school did not recognize like the jaggedness, right? That our students like bring to classroom spaces, their own uniqueness, right? Like Callie, there's some things that are really unique about you. And there's some things that like are unique and different about me. And our lived experiences, like though we've intersect, our lived experiences, for the most part, have been different. But our school system right now, in many ways, is like built around a one size fit all. So we're taking like these kids who are like complex and different across multiple dimensions, and we're pushing them into into a cookie cutter model. So we're saying like, hey, Cal, you learn math this time in this particular way. Donnell, you're going to learn science at this time in this particular way. Where like the things that excite me and light my heart up might look different than things that excite you and light your heart up. The ways I understand numerical value might be very separate and different than the way you learn numerical value. And we're not coming into schools like as empty like vacuums, right? Like we're coming to schools like rich of our own experiences, but we're pushing kids into like the into corners, right? We're pushing kids into spaces like that does not honor them as like full complete beings who come up with like a myriad of lived experiences. So we recognize that the school wasn't working for kids. And one thing we often say as our mantra is that like if school doesn't work for one kid, then school's not working. So we have to figure out like how do we design around that jaggedness? How do we ensure that our students like their bold ambitions are honored, who they want to be and become is honored, who like their hopes and dreams are honored, the fears that they have and they bring to our spaces are also recognized and honored. And how do we use our curriculum in service of that? So though we had like nailed we had nailed the state standards, I think we had double proficiency our first year, that felt good, right? And our kids needed like that moment of celebration. A school community needed that moment of celebration. like it still felt like this dress rehearsal, right? Because we were like, well, it's still like, we're still asking our kids to conform to a certain degree. We're still reinforcing the status quo. We're still like directly perpetuating parts of the system that like strip our kids of like living the fullness of who they are. And that didn't feel good. So that was our charge. Like we knew that we wanted students to become the architects of their own lives. And if we weren't defining that alongside of kids, and we weren't like truly in pursuit of that, like how we think about curriculum, how we're thinking about like our day-to-day experiences, how we're thinking about designing our school culture, or rather how we're like joining hands alongside of kids to think about our school culture and think about like curriculums and that sort of stuff in itself was inequitable because it doesn't like honor or wildly represent like that the level of jaggedness that our kids are bringing to spaces. So for us, like that was where our heat came from. That's where our flavors come from, and that's like the thing that's like kept us on the pursuit for the past like 3 years to try and figure out. And we're getting closer and closer, but we're still not there because it's really hard.
Yeah, something that one of your colleagues, Ginny O'Meara, I've heard her say that I think is really fascinating is like there's no done. We're constantly in beta mode, constantly piloting, testing, trying, and adjusting, and to continue to get better. And I think that's such a great mindset to have and thinking about what works for kids. And I've heard you touch on it a lot in the way that you and your team and your school and your community are now defining quality education. But I want to go back to that to really highlight, like, how is a more just way to define quality education?
Yeah. One thing that like, so yes, you're right. We use this term like perpetual beta, like we put everything in pilot, which means like everything is still it, like has a newness and we can often pivot and ensure like it's portable and it flexes with the growing needs and new demands of our children. So I do want to elevate that, right? So like we try to build things without or alongside of our kids without an emotional attachment to it, right? Because we know that like though that was a good thing, given like you play this in a new context, right? We might have to shift quick enough to meet that demand of our babies. How are we defining like quality like education? I think one is we first start with like radical inclusion, right? So you have to ask ourselves like, how are our babies define that, right? Like how are they like what are things that they want to learn? What are like some of the challenges directly in their lives that they want to like ameliorate or figure out? What are their passions? What are their bold ambitions? What are the things they want to be up to? And how's our curriculum like direct or school experiences directly in service of that? So that's how we're thinking about quality education. And a few things our kids said that they wanted was like they wanted to figure out their passion, they wanted to figure out their purpose, they want to figure out the things that they were interested in, and they want to live in the depths of their own identities. So now our job is like, how do we ensure that those four things that came through more really powerfully through our empathy interviews are widely represented, and how do we use our state standards in service of those four things, right? Those what we're calling our graduate aims. Like by the time our kids are 25, here are the things that they said they want to be true. And in order for that to happen, our kids have named that. So it's not like, so we design with kids and not for kids. So it's not like traditional programs like go and say, here's what kids are going to learn. Here's how they're going to learn it. And it's adult centered and adults are making that decision. And that in itself can be like defined as inequitable and a deep injustice. And you're designing for our babies, right? Without a certain lens on like, what are community wants for itself. So I think that's where we start. It's like, how are your communities defining what quality education is? And how are we taking like our learning agendas in pursuit of like those bold ideas? So for an example, the way that looks on the ground in our particular model, so our kids will say, all right, I want to focus on environmental injustice in Freedom Hill, so out in like Princeville, right? We know that this has been a community that has historically been under assault, right? Dating back to the early 1900s. Maybe
Say more
even
about that in case someone in our audience isn't familiar. Can you just give them a quick overview of what Princeville is?
yeah. So Princeville is a large, it's a small Black community in Eastern North Carolina. just outside of Tarboro, North Carolina. That has been over the past few years, they have been deeply their community has been deeply obliterated by these hurricanes over time, because it sits on a particular lowlands, and these they weren't, this was by design, so it wasn't just something that was like completely de facto, right? It was de jure. And they're descendants of like Africans who or at the time, who lived in the particular area, who were sold like parts of the land that they knew like wasn't going to amount to much, wasn't rich, and then set on like these lowlands that they knew would flood. And so years later, that's exactly what has happened. That it's like every hurricane that's come through North Carolina, it has flooded, and it has completely wiped out like the homes in the area, wiped out communities. And it's like leading to like over time, like deep historical injustice, to a point where descendants and families of long living residents of the space have now had to move out until like the rich history is no longer existing. So our kids are now like, that's something they're really concerned about, something they're really interested in. And as a result of that, they're trying to figure out, how do I use this science standard, the social studies standard, this math standard to solve this big problem? Right? We know that like facing some of the trends of the time, that the Freedom Hill may not be in existence. So as a result of that, I have to figure out, how do I take my Math 1 standard, my world history standard, understanding the context, and use that to solve that problem. Because that felt immediate to them. That felt like something that like stoked the heart, and something that our kids wanted to be up to. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great example. Thank you. I want to go back to something you said. You mentioned empathy interviews. Can you talk a little bit more about how it is that you include student voice into this defining anyway? What does that look like?
Yeah. So one thing I think is really important, again, I mentioned, is like this idea of just like radical inclusion. And inclusion is not just merely the absence of like exclusion, right? Like radical inclusion just requires just going further than that. So identifying like what are the barriers that exclude, and then eliminating those barriers, and then welcoming like the stories of our kids in those interviews, welcoming the stories of like other people and experiences to the innovation conversation, and creating spaces where everyone can truly bring their full selves and be equally valued, equally involved. So it's not just simply reducing respecting the differences or hate or age or any of that. It's about truly loving and valuing the person that you're sitting in power with. So how that looks is like not me going, like I'm going inside of families' homes, well, of course, pre-COVID, and just asking, like, when is your kid experience the moments of joy? When does your kid experience love the most? Like, what the things that makes your kids like sad? But then like turning, asking our kids the same, those same questions to help define our model. But it also, empathy interviews, it's like after I design based on like what our kids said they want, is going back to families and saying, is this what you said you want us to be up to? Like, where are moments where we can like shift our product and our process? And that's another thing I think is really important to us. Like, our process also dictates our product. So in order to design for equity, we believe that we must design like equitably. The practice of an equitable design also requires that we are mindful of how we achieve equity, right? And I think part of achieving equity is like actually raising the voices of young people in a real way. Not like going to kids and like asking like, hey, what do you want? But really taking like those insights and using that as design energy to create a fundamentally different experience for babies. So we start there. So before we go in and design these experiences and like, here's what school should be for kids, we start with first asking babies like, what do you want school to be? And you make the time for the magic of human connection, especially across that difference in age. Because our kids would say like, well, Mr. Cannon, like, we don't really want that. Like, that's not a school that like I want to become a raving fan of. And we often use this analogy, like, I want kids like with their shoes at their bed, ready to jump in them, like ready to jump in them or sprint to school because they're so excited to be a part of what we're building and designing for them. So empathy interviews is just simply like sitting with kids and asking like questions in a way that's like when you're completely leveled in power, and using that as like design energy to create fundamentally different experiences for children.
What is the role of the teacher in all of this?
Yeah. So in our school, we said like everyone's a designer, right? Everyone's completely powerful, and our teachers sit on that same on that's the same level of power with us. So our teacher should also be like figuring out how, as a curriculum designer, as a classroom designer, how do I ensure my classroom space honors like all the insights that our students that we've been able to gather? How does my curriculum directly support and catalyze the things that like students say they want to define, and the complexities they said they want to figure out by way of by way of our curriculums. So I think our teachers are one of the key drivers in this, because our teachers are the folks who are actually going to take those like key experiences that our kids are saying they want and actually bringing those into like some texture. So instead of saying like tonight, this is how like I'm going to design this lesson plan, but how do we backwards plan out of like our students' interests, their bold ambitions, the identities, like how the identities are wildly represented, and then like and then essentially like trying to create like this equitable backdrop. Like how do I ensure that like my school, my classroom honors like the richness that our students are elevating for us. So it's not like you're not figuring it out. Our kids are through our empathy interview, they're sharing exactly what they want. Our now demand is like trying to figure out how do we bring that like in its fullness into our curriculums and co-create with our kids, and not make and not make those assumptions in order. Not make those assumptions.
Yeah. So you and
And
your
then I
school.
think the one thing,
Go ahead.
I was saying one thing I do want to raise. One thing I do want to raise up is that like our teachers also have to remain hyper aware of their own identities and how biases impact their thoughts, their choices, their conclusions, and those assumptions, because those are going to show up like when you're creating those lesson plans, when you're designing your classroom culture and your spaces, the physical representations that are in that space, right? So it's like those are absent of like what our kids are saying they want, absent of the things that are coming, are pushing through those empathy interviews. That in itself like creates a space that that continues to perpetuate a traditional system that has not worked for children.
Yeah, that really connects to the next question that our team has for you, which is, you know, what's the role of anti-racism in this work?
Yeah. So one, it's not enough to just obviously, to your point, like say like I'm not racist, but how do you ensure that like you're standing against it in every part of your work, that you're standing guard in how you're creating oppressive structures by way of like your own like privileged trust that like systems over time have are correct, right? That the systems over time have are in true fact. So if you're not like standing guard of like your own implicit biases, your own explicit biases, then you're creating spaces. But how are you creating like when I think about like how are you creating spaces of aliveness for our kids, especially our students of color, like spaces where they get to show up and be like fully themselves. And if you're one of those teachers who are saying to kids like, yeah, I'm going to teach you this so you can code switch, or I'm going to teach you this so you can go to college. Like those kids actually want that for themselves. And are you actually stripping them of an opportunity to be fully live fully in their identities, right? Without like pushing them closer to the dominant culture. So like some of that takes like these equity pauses, right? Like where how am I showing up and peddling oppressive demonstrations across like my own curriculum, across my classroom spaces, and how am I showing up as anti-racist, like myself, like in a fully embodiment. And it has to be like this sense of complete urgency to just kind of like flush and smear our classroom, our school experiences of those like racist like practices, racist demonstrations, to ensure that students get like really rich experiences that pushes us closer to achieving equity.
So I hear you saying that, you know, there's a lot of personal identity work involved, and also an examining of the system in every moment, and to ensure that students are able to thrive in the fullness of who they are. We have a comment coming in from Ronald
Absolutely.
White who says, Mr. Cannon is a former math student of mine, so proud of him. Let's see. Also, I don't know if you want to respond to that really quick before I ask another question.
Dr. White, I think Dr. White was my math teacher at Norfolk State University.
Wow, well,
So.
he's tuning in right now.
So that's critical.
That's exciting. All right, we have a question for you too from Alex. And Alex wants to know, what have been the biggest obstacles to this approach at your school?
Yeah, it's so this is like our system itself like is hinged on the industrial model, right? It's all that we've ever known. But when we remove this like this industrial model, this industrial era system first model, like what is there in this emptiness? So I think the most difficult part is trying to create these dramatically like better experiences without having a true like blueprint there, right? And also like trying to evangelize it so that everyone understands like this is what schooling needs to become, for children to actually realize like the fullness of their potential. It's really hard to get people to see different, like what to build there, like when it's all gone, right? Like what then like stands in this emptiness, and that's been a bit unclear. So like trying to evangelize like something that like like folks haven't had a deep belief in, and then also stand in the face of those things that have reinforced the status quo. So that's been really difficult to like push through the ecosystem, because so many people are like so committed like to like a traditional system first model, and like once we strip that, it's really hard for people to see different. It's really hard for people to dream of something different that it's like ever been, and because of that, like that has been really hard to like navigate. So we've at every turn we've been trying to like radically include people so that folks can see like what this can become, can we see how we get there and join hands in that. And we've failed often. But we're committed to failing, as a form of like our own perpetual beta. And but we're seeing failure as like an opportunity to continue to create these really bold, radical experiences, where other people might see it as like under a traditional approach, like when you fell flat, it didn't work. And we're like, no. We just learned a ton, and we're gonna use this design energy to keep designing. So I think the hard part is like what it's hard for folks to really imagine like boldly, like what do we design in a space like when the structures, processes, systems have completely shifted. And so that has been hard. But I will say, in all the darkness that like COVID-19 has brought us, it has created an opportunity where like we've had to live in the emptiness, where folks have been like forced to kind of see, or forced to like just kind of maneuver in a around a space that is like that is free of like a long lasting industrial systems.
Yeah, there's so the conversation has really been around redefining during the last year, and that's the conversation that I've heard your school and your team and your community having now pre-COVID. Yeah. Okay, we have another comment here. This is from Christy Lyles, who I believe is a teacher at my old elementary school in my hometown of Wadesboro, North Carolina. She says she loves the idea of empathy interviews and planning backwards from there. So here's something that I'm wondering, maybe if anybody in our audience is interested in that with the empathy interviews and that's new to them, how could they get started with doing something like that?
Yeah, it doesn't it doesn't take like like a transcript. You tomorrow could like get a group of kids together and say like what are things that most excite you in your current life. What are things in the world that you want to be more curious about? How can we make this classroom a better experience for you? And and mapping your insights. Where are there moments of tension? And finding those moments of attention and designing those as insights, and using the how might we questions. Now, how might I design a space that ... right? Insert the like your you insert your child's like response. How might I create a space that your student wants to come to every day? how do I create a space that allows Callie to pursue her passion and her purpose? How might I create a space that allows like a Black boy to feel alive and to feel like welcomed, and to feel like they can show up in the fullness of who they are, and use that like to create the how might we question. How might I create my curriculum that honors that? How might I create a classroom space that better that better recognizes that? Um, so that is that. I think like you start right there, your classroom.
Yeah, and that okay, I'm looking at the clock. We're almost out of time, but I do want to finish with one more quick question before we close out. So in thinking about this, you've shared so much that really has me thinking, and I'm sure, you know, the rest of the teachers in our audience and our team as well, we're going to continue to dive into these themes. And can you share with us a little bit, like what has the impact of this approach been for your school and your community? What have you seen?
Yeah. So like for us, like we've seen our kids make like incredibly big leaps. So our first year we doubled proficiency, and over time, like we've only continued to ascend. So we're at this point we were second highest performer in our district. Because we instead of saying like here's what you're gonna learn, how are you gonna learn it, we took like what our kids were actually saying, the things that actually excite them, the things that like that kind of like they want to be up to and thinking about. We build those directly into our classrooms and experiences. So it's no longer like, hey, you're gonna learn rote math, and the math is gonna look like this, and here's how you're gonna solve equations. But instead, we're gonna you say you want to learn about like what is it like how do I make natural hair products to ensure like more of my ladies of color like feel really good about themselves, and I might use my equation to solve that problem. Like our students are now overstanding the standard. So when they're stepping into like these single problems on like the assessments, us kids can now like share like multiple avenues of solving that problem because they've applied it. They've done the critical thinking. They're using that in service of like solving the social problems, to create it more of a just world. So our kids, like again, they're like they're deeply like engaging with like the content standards beyond just a single pathway that it might have been offered under like a single rote education. So that in itself has been like an undertaking like journey, and it's proven that like once we are given space for like design with our kids, then amazing bold things can happen.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing all of that with us and being here with us today. And we'll invite you as well and all teachers who are watching along with us to engage further in this conversation. In the next couple of days, we'll open up a discussion in our online community Participate. So we'll make sure that that link is in the comments so that people can come in and talk more with us about how are we defining quality education alongside of kids and communities. And just invite you all to tune in 2 more weeks as we have our next episode of Math for Antiracism. Thank you so much, Donnell, for joining us. It's so great to, we could talk about educational equity and opportunities for kids all day long. So I'm glad to have you in this space here at T2T Global. Thanks to all of our audience, and we will see you soon.